Uh,
Hi.
so I'm going to record the call and we'll see what happens. Um, but Anna, I know Annika's on vacation for the remainder of the month, and Jeff had something come up, so he wasn't able to make the call. And we'll record it for posterity in case other people come. And if not, the three of us can catch up on stuff because we don't get a chance to do that. So it's a little more relaxing.
And I just got off the content creators call too with Faye and Christine and Raja from Forward City. So it was a different group too. It was small and not the same group. So
What is
Yeah.
that?
that is an informal meetup that it's usually Jeff, Annika, me, Yuval from Keystone. We just compare editorial calendars basically. So it's
Cool.
like NRP content creators.
Nice.
And Christine jumped in today to just to listen in. And then Faye jumped in to give an update on the Ecosystems Unite stuff. So mostly I took notes to share.
Okay, good.
What's happening with Ecosystems Unite?
So I will catch you up on that. Faye, Kristen, and I, thank you for joining us, Eric, because I needed to catch you up on that as well. So Faye, Kristen, and I took this idea of the whole Ecosystems Unite. Ecosystems Unite started out as a conversation during the tail end of SCN Summit in March. So we had this conversation on what the heck are we going to do about this COVID thing, and this was before the whole world shut down. And we talk about the necessity for nodality in open networks, and it should not be hub and spoke as far as ecosystem building is concerned. But for information like what the heck are we going to do about a pandemic, that seemed to be that people needed to have some place that they could go and collect information and see what's happening in the rest of the world and best practices. And that's where Ecosystems Unite was born. We realized that it shouldn't be in a platform that lived on one group, right? It's not ESHIP, it's not Startup Champions, it's not co-starters, it's not, startup space and all of those other things. It needed to be wide open so that anybody could come and share. We picked Facebook as a place that people would go to anyway, and just started to point people in a direction and say, welcome, share, whatever it is. But it was very specific for COVID. And from that, the whole idea of uniting ecosystems came into play. As we developed Summit agenda, all of us in individual groups talked about all the events that take place in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Hi, Jess. Um, we're just explaining the birth of Ecosystems Unite. So, um, so from the conversation at the SEN Summit to creating a Facebook group where information just kind of free flowed, I'll tell you that there were only, we put into place in the Facebook page that you needed to request to join, although it was an open space. The only reason for that is we wanted to make sure that you weren't a bot, right? So, so not having the, like making sure that you were an actual person was the only stipulation of coming to join the Ecosystems Unite Facebook page. There were 2 posts that I've ever deleted. I don't know about Eric, anybody else, Eric or whoever, who's been a moderator or an admin for this group page. But the only 2 posts that I've ever deleted was, one was a replica of something that was posted like 2 hours before this person posted. So redundancy. And then the other one was somebody promoting their book, because we were very specific about the fact that anybody could come with information about their response to COVID, but but it wasn't there for self-promotion. So that's the only post that I know. Eric, did you encounter anything?
I mean, I'll Well, wait a second. Are we recording this call?
Yes, yes.
So in that case, what I'll say is that I think it was more I've been a hard-assed moderator on some groups before. That was not the intent on this one. So to the extent that somebody might have been posting too much or what we tried to do or what I tried to do was kind of coach a little bit more behind the scenes about how to make posts more useful. If folks were posting too much, maybe get them to calm that down. But I'd say kind of soft and gentle moderation, which is maybe a little more time consuming. And I did that a little bit toward the beginning, but not very much recently.
Great, thank you. So to catch Hassan up, we're just talking about the birth of Ecosystems Unite. So as this Ecosystems Unite became kind of an umbrella calling card to here's the wide community helping to respond on one subject. As the ESHIP Summit started evolving, and then all of the organizations around ecosystem building, co-starters, startup champions, NBIA, NACI, all of the national resource providers that have their own conferences and conventions started to populate the dates. The realization was it would be a really good thing to help promote at the ESHIP Summit. So ESHIP Summit being a good convener of all these different groups, lending visibility and exposure and highlight to here are all these other things happening, became this umbrella of under Ecosystems United. Just seemed like a good title. So to that end, Faye, Kristen, and I are working on what a professional field of ecosystem building looks like when it's mass collaboration, right? And what does community look like, and all of those things. So it's a pancake. It's the first pancake of here's mass community that's not necessarily held up by the foundation or an organization, but we want it to be very specific to building the professional field. Jeff Bennett wrote a great article about startup communities, which is the space that Brad Feld kind of launched around grassroots stuff. And the goal of that is very specifically grassroots, come as you are, populate whatever. This seemed to be more of a refined focus. So anyway, I've done a lot of talking. I don't know if anyone, hi Stephen, if anybody has any questions or whatnot, as far as what Ecosystems Unite has merged into or become.
Hey, quick question. When you said, what mass collaboration looks like, was that a question or is that what you're all heading into?
Well, that's as far as the Ecosystems Unite kind of movement and momentum is what we're trying to catalyze, which is a little bit different from because startup communities is there's a lot of focus on startups, and what we wanted to do was focus on ecosystem building in particular, which is nuanced, right? I mean, Jess and Tiana, you write about this stuff all the time, and it's slightly different. So I'm curious to know what you see as how do you explain that to people?
Repeat the question, sorry.
So do you see a difference in ecosystem building versus entrepreneur support, and how do you explain that nuance when you're writing or talking about it?
So that's a really good question. For us, I think a lot of our approach to entrepreneur support is community-based. Like that's our entire model, is that it's a cohort, it's peer driven, it's collaborative. Everyone needs support to succeed. So it's infused. I think the idea of the ecosystem building is infused in the way we support entrepreneurs. However, we often, we've had to go back and forth a little bit, because even though that is the philosophy behind how we approach entrepreneur support, the actual act of working on ecosystem building and working on entrepreneur support are often two different kind of sets of activities, even if your philosophy is the same. So I think a lot of our, in our efforts to figure out where we fit and where our niche is, we end up doing a lot of ecosystem building work and supporting ecosystem building as the whole. And obviously we're hugely involved in ESHIP and all these other initiatives. We've actually found it to be challenging for people to look at us and try to figure out what we do and who we are, because they see us, there's so many people doing the ecosystem building, and it's taken a little bit away from our most important focus, which is, at the end of the day, the entrepreneur support. So I think our goals are very similar, but the activities maybe that we're doing, the end goal of who's ultimately benefiting from all of this is the starter or the entrepreneur. But the actual activities that we're doing, I think we try to focus our content and focus our tools and focus our messaging, especially in our marketing, on what goals are they trying to accomplish, what activities are they doing, and like the philosophy is always there and underneath, and we're always trying to connect them as individual ecosystem builders, grassroots leaders and communities who may not identify with that term. We're trying to help them see themselves as part of this bigger whole, but in most of the time, their more immediate needs, they're not going to go out and look for ecosystem building tools. They're going to look for entrepreneur support tools. And so that's our doorway into this bigger conversation. So I think we do kind of have a unique challenge in that we're doing practical things on both ends of the spectrum, but then we also have a lot of partners who are more heavily focused on the actual ecosystem building tools and the activities and action of ecosystem building. Is that helpful? Yeah, what Jessica just put in the chat, looking at the whole from grassroots to government, a lot of our people that we focus on helping are very much like grassroots. They're just looking here. And I think that can be really overwhelming, even trying to bring them into the ESHIP community or conversations. They're like, whoa, it's like, I can barely take care of like what I have right in front of me, let alone get involved in all these bigger things. But then there's plenty of people too who feel trapped and like they're not really being able to affect change on the bigger level, who have really great ideas, who are working on the grassroots level. So we're always looking to connect them, even if they are not looking at everything. If you're just looking at your neighbor or your peer in another city that's similar to yours, the idea of like maybe one node at a time kind of ecosystem building, instead of having to have your head around all of it or connected to all of it at the same time, just having them help start to see and think about like, a peer. It's all about peers, right? Peers, and then finding like unlikely peers in places which you wouldn't think to look, and making those connections. So.
I see Eric nodding his head. Hassan, did you have something you wanted to share?
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about this lately, actually, because I was thinking about the distinction, not the distinction, but because I was thinking about activists and advocates and ecosystem builders and whether one can be the other or not. So I think along the same lines, with entrepreneur support and ecosystem building, I think if I look at it in terms of, if you're a business, you have your customers. So an entrepreneur support organization, your customers are entrepreneurs. So there's always an element of competition involved in that, because you have other organizations that do similar things competing for the same amount of money. I think the distinction is like the ecosystem builder to me is more like a missionary in a sense, because you're reaching out to people and you're trying to bring people into something bigger than what they're doing individually. So like I think about someone that does ecosystem building can also do entrepreneur support work, but someone who does entrepreneur support work cannot automatically be an ecosystem builder. So there's I think a really unique quality that you either have or you don't. And I think some of it you can learn, but there's an innate quality, I think, within individuals and their personality that makes them an ecosystem builder or makes them a candidate to become an ecosystem builder if they learn certain things. And the reason I say that is because I was thinking about activists and advocates. If you're an activist or an advocate, I don't think you can necessarily be an ecosystem builder because you're focused on a very specific cause or a very specific thing. And sometimes that keeps you, based on what your beliefs are about something, that keeps you from bringing others into that fold. So I've been thinking about these things about ecosystem builders and, who has those qualities, who doesn't.
So we talk about the profession and the practice, and I think to Hassan's point, somebody mentioned allies and accomplices. So they see the person who was talking about it saw ecosystem builders as accomplices. So you engage, you're active, you're catalyzing, and molding at the same time, where allies and advocates are supportive, but not necessarily shifting or molding in that same way. So it was a really interesting, nuanced conversation. All of this is open for definition, but and then there's also the idea of working in the field or working on the field, right? Building the professional field of ecosystem building, and then working in ecosystem building as a whatever else you do, so like a skill up. Jess is nodding a lot, so I want to hear from you, Jess.
I said I would listen more than talk on this one. But yes, I agree about the working on the field versus working in the field. I think where people get in trouble with ecosystem building is, and just like the startup world, there's a lot of obnoxious buzzwords that people use in the startup communities and with ecosystem building. And a lot of times folks will just say, well, what does that mean? What do you really do? What is your product? What is your, and so I think that we're just in this, to the point about Brad Feld and Techstars is really kind of coming out strong, defining startup communities and tech communities versus ecosystem building. They're not interchangeable. I do appreciate that it's kind of starting to get defined a little bit more. Do I think that there's still a credibility issue with ecosystem building because it's not very defined by one product, or this is what it is for each community? Yes. So yeah, I just think there's this tightrope or a little bit of a dance between making sure that there's tangible takeaways that people can buy into and actually see for credibility reasons, but it also is more holistic and encompassing than just startup tech community or being a resource provider for one thing. It's systematic and looking at the system. So I don't know if that was just a bunch of buzzwords and fluff, but that's kind of where I've seen the kind of what holds us back, and also why people don't really get it all the time is it's not very defined by credible measures yet because it's new, but I do appreciate that it's starting to get very defined startup tech community ecosystem building, because both are needed, but the credibility thing is where I'd like to focus on how we get there as a credible profession and process. That's all I have.
Yeah, that's great. That's a lot of important buzzwords and fluff that all go together to make impact. So thank you. I know that on one of the, on the Goal 7 call on sustainable work, one of the things that, that the group identified was with ecosystem building, because we don't have metrics around some of the, some of it is what we think of as intangibles, right? It's how do you measure the strength of a community or the bonds that are created or the number of connections, and one of the people that were on the call said, well, we just need to put a stake in the ground and say, this is an important measurement. Like retention is huge. If you're in a community, stay in a community, work on the community, things like that, that we haven't measured as a valid indicator, we need to just start measuring it and saying, this is something. So that's where goal 7 and goal 5 and all of this starts working around. So as you may or may not know, we're shifting the cadence of these calls to start focusing on several different aspects or streams, and one of them being more deep dive learning, but also in communicating across goals. So we're going to get there. The ESHIP champions will this week and the coming weeks before ESHIP help work on what that new iteration will be. I will likely be sending all of you some input forms and evaluations on what you think is working, isn't working, what we should continue doing, and what we should think about doing. So anybody have any thoughts or ideas as we're trying to capture that? Eric, as you take a drink.
No super special thoughts. I mean,
Okay.
lots of longer, not well packaged thoughts, put it that way.
So as we're recording this and as you're thinking about it, can you help share in your experience, what do you think is working? Like what's a win? Where have we gone in the last 3 years that we can point to and say we've made progress? Or what are the challenges?
I personally think that connections, I mean, there's certainly much more connecting going on, right? Strategic connecting in these calls. I've been one of the ones more hesitant to have to jump on another call. And I started like just trying to connect here and there with this person or that person, and eventually it all converges back, why don't we just jump on this call because we're all on this one? So there's a lot of, I think, that synergy in a way. It takes a little bit to sort that out sometimes and figure out how you can still be strategic and accomplish something. And I think we're working through that, not always super gracefully. But there's certainly much more communication and cross channel, cross goal communication happening, which I don't think would have happened without some kind of formal like way to organize it, So I think we as an organization, we're already finding ourselves informally doing a lot of that. And it's been great to actually see how many of the same people we were already partnering with or collaborating with have been like the core people in these conversations.
So a couple, I'll give, what is it? What do they call it? A sandwich or something? Like a couple good things and a thing that I think is has been on my mind. So a couple good things. One is, I think I'd reference the goal 1 and goal 5 calls. So inclusive field and what is it? I always get the quantitative measures and metrics. I always get that a little bit screwed up in terms of the name. But one of the things that both of those groups has done is, aside from the project work, a pretty consistent flow of representatives from really cool organizations or people who are doing really, really good work and trying to get the word out about what it is that they're doing and connecting those folks with ecosystem builders, who are part of this network. So what is it? Change Catalyst or Tech Inclusion, Start Out, a number of other organizations dealing with accessibility and other issues about getting entrepreneurs involved. I think that's been a real strength for, say, the Goal 1 group. Goal 2, I'm not sure that we did a lot of project work, but one of the things that our work did sort of result in is these intro to ESHIP calls. So, since what we were doing was trying to find an onboarding process for folks to get involved with more regional ESHIP kind of activities, Dia, Tiffany, and I got together and had something already in the works that we could use for helping onboard folks, or at least helping get people kind of more aware of what's happening with ESHIP. And I won't go into all the potential successes with, say, Goal 5. The thing that I'm more aware of in listening and trying to dabble and get involved with a few more calls these days, like I used to at the very beginning, is I wonder about how we're, let me see if I got the right question, which is folks sometimes pop in and they want to get some help with a thing that's happening in their ecosystem. And I feel like sometimes as somebody who's helping organize a goal, I kind of think, well, what we're doing is we're working on this field level. At the end of the day, the ecosystem builder or community builder, whatever their role is, they need help today. They need help today for something in their community. And I don't think we're not connecting the dots as well as we could with those needs. And I don't know where to send them. I think Ecosystems Unite is going to help with that, but that's the part where I'm like, that feels like it's a missed opportunity for me right now.
Excellent. Stephen, you've been around tangentially. What do you see working? What is not working? Or what's a challenge?
Well, I do know people still don't know what I do in DC. So even, I think to something Jessica said earlier, it's just, I haven't been able to shape that narrative properly of what exactly I do. I try to define ecosystem building in a way, and I try to use most of the common language that I find across Kaufman, maybe sometimes Startup Community Way, but people are still not understanding, or it's not leading to trust. Maybe it's not that the narrative isn't there and we don't have the right language, but maybe it's somehow not sparking trust enough, because apart from saying, I don't know what you do, Stephen, is that they're not trusting in some way, shape, or form that this is legit, or something's causing that doubt in their mind. So it's how to overcome that. And I don't know if it's through narrative building or shaping the narrative in this case, or how to build that trust initially. But that's one of the interesting pieces I see.
Hassan, you shared some stuff earlier. Will you, or will you share that? And then Jess, if you'll add to that.
Sure.
Sorry, sorry, you wanted me to share.
So the wins and the challenges of what's been going on in the last couple of years, like where do you see us having good momentum? Where do you see opportunities in improving?
I mean, as far as wins, more than anything, I think there's broader recognition of the field. And I think I shared this on another call recently, but in the work that we're doing at Forward Cities, even with traditional economic development in some of the cities that we're in, there's recognition of what an ecosystem builder is, the need for an ecosystem builder in communities. I mean, we're looking at models in each one of the cities that we're in on the national side at Forward Cities, and we're looking at identifying backbone organizations that can carry and sustain the work that we're doing. And all of those conversations involve having philanthropy or someone perhaps within municipal government fund the role of an ecosystem builder who coordinates all the different efforts, aligns the strategies, the regional strategies, and just convenes people. So there's, I think more than anything, if you get away from the actual goals and the projects under each goal, I think just recognition of the field and aligning all of these people on, the goals, what we're trying to achieve in terms of a vision for the field. I think that has been, I think you can't understate that.
Great. Jess?
Yeah, kind of to echo that, I would say a positive in general that I've seen as one foot in doing projects and trying to help with the field, moving it forward. The last 1 to 2 years, I would say there's much more formal ecosystem building titles and jobs, which 5 years ago, no, it was, I was building co-working spaces, but we had a social mission and I did a lot extra work. So I was an ecosystem builder, but I have the title. Now I have it. I just had a call with someone else in Virginia that just got hired by a state entity as an ecosystem builder in Shenandoah. So I would say the last 1 to 2 years, I've been connecting with people that have formal titles, which is a great sign because the funders are either government, foundation, people that are not ecosystem builders, but are giving credibility to it. So that's exciting. I would say probably where we could do better with the momentum and the leverage of these groups and the ESHIP community in Kaufman is I definitely appreciate, as someone that's highly collaborative, I love a highly collaborative, all-inclusive approach, but ultimately sometimes when it's, hey, everybody, it's inclusive, the leadership gets lost and we kind of get in a system where it's never really, it's not about taking credit and giving some folks more control and power to do things. But if people are stepping up and taking on, a project or a part of it, and they seem to have just organically are taking a leadership role, I do think that it's actually counterproductive sometimes with these groups that it seems like the calls can be always back to square one of let's talk about what else we could do. Let's talk about what else is out there versus if there's tangibles in the pipeline, let's split the groups maybe. So maybe a suggestion is there should be 2 calls, right? This kind of networking, just let's meet people and collaborate. But then if there's actual projects and tangibles happening, let's not lose that momentum and fizzle and distract from kicking the ball down the field, because my best mentor always told me, it's not about home runs, it's about baseline hits. So every single week, if there is a project, those folks should be every single week only talking about that project, working on it. And if people want to join and they can delegate a role, great. But I do think these calls need to have a 2-prong approach, talking just to say what else is there, let's create new. And then folks that are actually working on stuff, not sucking their time, effort, and energy of having to distract from having some wins and having some tangibles. So that's maybe where we can maybe develop the working groups a little bit more defined that way. But that's all I have for now.
I love it. No, thank you. That's great. Beth, are you able to share your thoughts? I know you're driving.
Sure, I'm no longer driving. I'm walking around my backyard. What was the question? Oh, what are the wins and what are the challenges, right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I feel pretty happy about the awareness improvement across the board, and that aligns with goal 6. It wasn't anything specific I think that any of us necessarily did, but it's just the collective action of all of us that has helped. Even in my community, who leadership has decided that this isn't their priority in economic development, they still are using the terms and talking about ecosystems and things like that. So, and then across the country where you see what Victor and Kim are doing with Right to Start, and Brad with Startup Communities, and Techstars with the ecosystem language that they're utilizing and ecosystem building stuff. So it's becoming more and more accepted. I think our challenges, and I don't know if I hate to use it, but the A word with accountability. I think a lot of the projects could, if we had some kind of incentive for folks or some co-opetition around the goals to really be able to knock some of these out and go directly to some NRPs with the project plans and the propose budgets and be able to start building those relationships and be accountable to get these things done somehow. I'd love to see that happen. I don't know. I don't have a solution, so I don't like to really bring up challenges when I don't have a solution, but that's been something that's been on my mind.
That's great. It's like you teed it up. So, um, so let me share for input the some of the calls that we're talking about, and ESHIP Champions will be talking about this on their call this week as the evolution of these ESHIP goal calls moves on. We're recognizing that, especially thanks to Dia and Eric and Tiffany and Beth helped on the last call before, talking about introduction to ESHIP goal communities. What the heck is an ESHIP goal? What's going on in the community? What do these projects mean? You know, all kinds of things like that. We're hoping that maybe some of that is a little more visibility on what projects are actually happening as we get more updates on that and how people can be involved. So just a way to open things up, and especially if you've only been on one call or none of the calls and you've just heard of this thing, that it's a really great way to get just a quick overview of what this thing is about. There is, as some of you mentioned, a need for project team calls and opportunities to update and share visibility, maybe share needs, roadblocks and barriers. So in putting something like that together, I'm creating a template for people to upload information to say, here are the current goal projects. These are open for collaboration. Here's a roadblock that we're coming up against. Here's the person to contact if you want to get involved or introduce or whatever. And we're hoping to make that visible. While we recognize that there were 30 as a good place to start, it's not limited to just those 30 goal project initiatives, right? But people who are doing the work need to be able to get together and talk about work. And to some of your points, it's about the recognition. Maybe it is incentive, and it's a good place for NRPs to be able to look to see what maybe is in their stream of things to do. There's also a need for deep thinking and learning. So what Goal 1 and Goal 5 have done is brought current thought leaders and people that are working on those fields to tell us a little bit more about the stuff that they're doing, do a deep dive, learning and informing and engaging. So there's a need for some kind of learning call, right? Shared knowledge and such. And there's also one that's more about networking and relationships. If you just want to geek out with the people who are like you, if you need to ask people questions, and maybe that's a place where if you have a challenge that's not necessarily a goal topic, but if you have a challenge in your local community, who can you reach out to? Who can you talk to? And know that maybe get some ideas of solutions or to share or just get to know each other. So to Tiana's point about building those connections and strengthening, what we've realized is when you build connections and relationships, then it's easier to build the trust, right, Stephen? So that people can, there are people that you can go to and find solutions or hope or just a little island of sanity to get through to the next part of your day. So far we've identified 4. I think we start with those. We're open to whatever else needs to happen, and some of that will go spin off into something else, right? There'll be people that form projects. You don't need to wait for a goal call to come and talk about these things. Then you get to know each other and contact each other on Slack or on another platform or in community to say, hey, I'm working on a thing. Do you want to work on this thing with me, or what do you think? So far that's the conversation and the evolution. It seems like it's a natural evolution because these goals are also interdependent. And goal 2 and goal 4 need to figure out what, what universal support needs data, and the metrics people would hopefully be inclusive about the things that they're doing and get, so these goals definitely have a lot of interdependencies. So, any other questions, thoughts, ideas? Because then we have another thing to talk about.
Real quick, I think to add to Beth's point about motivation or accountability, I think it would be really great to have a clear communication for buy-in of this working group work. Yes, it contributes to the movement, but in kind of day-to-day real life, how is it going to be used? I think for me, knowing that Kaufman's supporting it, backing in, is going to shine a light on it. If that's the case, great. If not, that's okay. But I do think that might be a potential way to get people engaged and motivated, is if there's a very clear understanding of where is this going to a black hole to never be seen again, or where are the outputs and this going to be shared to move us forward, or whatever. But I do think that that's missing a little bit of just a very clear connection of working groups to ESHIP, the E mothership, I would say. So
I like that.
where does this go? Yes, is our work going directly to somewhere, and it's going to maybe be contributing to some literature or whatever, or not. But I do think that would be a motivator for some folks too, to know exactly where potentially this work could get showcased or shown. So that's it.
Yes, and there is, and to your point, Jess, that there is a 4th draft of the playbook. So you've seen, and there's a link to the 3rd draft of the playbook currently on the Kaufman site. But there will be another draft. There will be another part of the playbook. It's actually more in depth and robust, and there's a lot of information about complexity and how that also moves into it. So yes, and I think part of that is also what we're striving for Ecosystems Unite, in that we would take information and synthesize it and show more exposure, being able to share repositories of stories like Intersections, Tiana, and EV Hub, and Yuval and Charlton's podcast, The Keystone, and all of those other things. They're just as important as it is to have all of that out there in the world. We're seeing, again, like the response to COVID, like there should be somewhere you can go, right? There should be something where if people Google ecosystem building, that they get pointed in a direction and find some of the answers so that they can explore for themselves. But you need to know where the map is. Right? You can't figure out where the map is without having a map. So maybe it's a little bit of that. In the time that we have left, I'd like to think about what that. I still really want to put this in a event or some other forum to talk about this whole dark side of ecosystem building you brought up. So can we touch on that a little bit, maybe take some notes and figure out where that could live? Because I think Tiana would have some great ideas on that too, and Stephen. So
me too.
And yes, great. Jess, share with us your vision of the dark side.
Oh gosh, everyone's gonna think I'm horrible. Okay, well, so just to let you all know, a couple calls ago, another thing that I think we could maybe add value to is ESHIP is so great. All of us have in our DNA to be positive Patties and eternal optimists, and that's just kind of a part of the work. But there is a thing called toxic positivity when people cannot feel comfortable sharing, or it's only always about what's going well. It can be a really big blind spot, not just in this work, but in business, right? If you can't be honest about what's not going well, or you just need to vent, or you need to just say, is anyone else dealing with, issues in their community? And you find out, yeah, it's not just you. So this just came up because I went on a rant about, it actually refuels me when I get to talk with folks that are higher level than me that are doing ecosystem building work, and I say, I'm really struggling and I'm getting burnt out, and they say, I deal with it too. The irony of us both kind of bitching and saying I'm frustrated is I actually get motivated feeling I'm not isolated, and if it's someone more successful than me that's dealing with it, I'm like, okay, let me just make it less than it is, and it just brings it back down to compartmentalizing. So there is a need to not always be championing, the bright side of things, but also having honest conversations to see if we have common themes of what we're struggling with, maybe we can find solutions. So basically, if people are open and comfortable to have a bitch sesh, that's kind of the goal, but it's productive bitching is what I would like to call it. But Beth or Tiana or anyone else that felt, it resonated, please share. But that's kind of what I wanted to make sure, that there was a space in this community for the dark side of stuff, just so that people don't feel so having to be positive Patties all the time if that's not really what's happening.
Yeah, it's a needed thing. I mean, we, on that call before, we talked about, first you admit you have a problem before you can get to a solution. You have to first admit that you have a problem. And since I've been in this work, I was so, weirdly relieved to know that every other community deals with the silos and the competition, misplaced competition. So having some safe space to come in and have these conversations and support each other can go a long way to reducing the amount of burnout that might occur across the country with ecosystem builders, and just the whole self-care subject. I mean, we can go to heck with the joke around self-care stuff, but it's more important than people think. And that the bitch sessions is part of that. It's therapeutic, and sometimes solutions and great ideas can come from having those conversations.
I've come to appreciate counseling for other reasons, but related to this, it's that, we, as much as we love to work in this and as much as we're trying to make impact, we do have to vent because things don't always go the right way. And without venting, we kind of pent it up. And so, it can affect us in other ways unintentionally. So I love counseling for that, because at the very least, I can just let it out, whatever it is, even though whoever's receiving it is not really going to care much, but at least I can let it out, and it's like a de-stressor in a way. But from a community builder standpoint, can we find ways to have something similar where we can vent, I think, to your word, and kind of reset in a bit, so that we can, just get it out of our minds, because some of it does, it does linger unless we talk about it. And we may not feel comfortable necessarily, but we don't feel a safe zone, let's say, to let it out.
I think I shared with somebody how, when we hear dissent in a community and we assume that there's a problem, and yes, there's a problem, but the fact that you hear the dissent actually means that you're working towards having people feel like they belong in the community and that they can openly air. Because if what I found in my experience is that when people don't feel like they're able to voice their concerns, they just go away. So you think that the problem isn't existing. It's not that the problem doesn't exist. It's that people leave because they don't feel like they're a part, or they have engagement in the solution, or they feel like their voices are shut down. And so um, when you're hearing the dissent and you're hearing the challenges, it means that people care and that they want to do something proactive. So dissent is not a bad thing.
I think I read what you wrote, Jess, and thank you for the effort you put into that. It was great, the proposal. And I think when I think about just any time you're wanting to encourage people to be vulnerable, you're trying to create a safe place, right? And often I think even the entire context of like ESHIP and the summit is it's all about solving problems. And a lot of times when you need to vent about something, it's not actually about finding the solution for it. It's just about being able to put it out there and feel support. So I think there is value in framing like a particular event or space or something, putting parameters on it where this isn't about solving this problem right now. This is about identifying the problems. Even when you do design thinking, like you're not, the solving the problem isn't happening in the same sequence, right? You're sitting there really trying to understand the problem, sit with the problem, look at the problem, and then solving it comes later. And so I think there's often not a lot of opportunity for that, just really understanding the problem. And that's where the voices of people get lost. So we're so quickly moving to solutions.
Eric, Hassan, Jess?
Well, my question to you, Celia, is, as I did the proposal, I also made it clear I don't have it in me to lead it. And it does sound like there's interest. I know Beth might be willing to do it, but I guess, since you're kind of the e-shipper on the call, where can it fit if no one, can it be built into the conversational kind of networking portion, or is there a non-goal, space for it? But I guess, you would have an idea where it can fit. Is it just the summit? Is it the working group? Where could it fit if it's a need or there's an interest?
So obviously it sounds like from all of you, there was a need and an interest. And so two thoughts come to mind, Jess. And one of them is, yes, I think that that's a great conversation starter for a networking call, just a social networking community call that would happen. And it doesn't have to be the subject of every one of those calls, but it would be a good subject for one of those calls. I've started to convene a group of people in something I call In Community, and it's small group discussions about a subject just to get it kick-started, but to build relationships and trust. It would be good on something like that. But I actually also proposed it as part of the Startup Champions Network Summit. And Startup Champions is a professional association of ecosystem builders, and part of that big thing is community. Startup Champions will be helping to facilitate some of the community aspects of what we're looking at evolving Ecosystems Unite to be, which doesn't get held up by as much support as the ESHIP community, but more of a grassroots effort in the profession of ecosystem building. So there's a couple of different things, and so we're testing it out. And one of the other things I think that I want to make note of as we're taking notes on the dark side is there are people like you and Tiana and Eric and Beth and Stephen, all of you who have come to this work, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes with a little bit of here's here's part of the work that you do, but there's a lot of burnout, and being able to pass the torch is really important. Um, and I think that we as ecosystem builders feel like we have to do it all the time, and it's exhausting, and we don't talk about, I mean, that's part of the self-care too, right? So it's also being able to say, okay, look, I need to tag somebody else to do it. And so I hear you, Jess. I'm gonna hold the baton for a little bit. I'm gonna wave it at a bunch of people, and I'm gonna see where it lands, as long as you're okay with it, and it's open for discussion. But when that happens, I will invite all of you to come and be a part of the conversations.
So Cecilia, Enoch is up for it if he can't find somebody else.
All right.
I was just texting him. We do this exact thing for our co-starter summits. We call it Whiskey and War Stories.
Yep. Which we do at SEN.
Well, and I know he has a lot of experience facilitating something like that. We had also put our names in for a couple other things, but haven't heard back on those yet. So we just need to make sure and coordinate efforts. But in the spirit of passing the torch, if there's somebody else who is gung-ho about the idea and would want to jump on it and do it, that could be great. But he said he was game. So.
I think that it's not a one solo thing, right? I think we also think about those, like all these goal projects. It's not one. It's like there could be many flavors of what something looks like. And the idea of the visibility is so that you can see what other people are working on, and you can say, oh, I see that's being tended to. I'm going to put my energy towards something else. Or it could be, I see what you're working on. I have something that tangentially, could be a sidecar or could work adjacent or aligned, and there's creating that momentum. So, and there could be 5 solutions to this, and it would be great if there were 5 dark side conversations or 50 dark side conversations. So I think that putting it out there in the world is very important, and then yours could look very different than what we envision. So.
I agree. Thanks for keeping it going.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you all for your time and energy. Are there any passing last call thoughts before we go? Okay. Then I will definitely move stuff forward and be in touch with all of you to let you know what more can happen. And Stephen, I will be talking to you soon for sure. And Eric and Hassan, and Beth, Tiana, I look forward to seeing you at ESHIP, if not before, and Jess. We'll be in touch as well. Thank you all for your time and energy, and for bringing it here.
Thanks, Celia. Bye, everyone.
Good seeing everyone. Thank you.
Have a good rest of your week.
Bye.
Bye.